Hi, everyone. I'm Darren, and I've been sharing some background on my watercolor maps, which are my attempt to capture spatial geographical experiences of the natural world. So, check out my earlier videos for the beginning of that. In this one, I'm going to start with my decision to go into landscape architecture as a way to heighten experiences of ecological islands and contrasts out in the real world, rather than just through the artwork that I'd been doing as a hobby. But of course, I ended up circling back to the artwork again, ultimately. So, as I really should have expected, it turns out that landscape architecture is more interested in landscape patterns, these islands and contrasts, when they're the result of human activity rather than natural conditions alone. And that makes sense because those are the patterns that designers are most likely to be working with or working in, and for good reason. Landscape architecture is the reason that I'm now also interested in those cultural landscape patterns as inspiration for the maps and more generally. But back then, I was much more into wild and remote places. In school and professional practice, I did have a few chances to use those places for inspiration, but never designing in those particular places themselves. And for a bunch of reasons, those designs rarely made it beyond the concept stage. So I needed to find another way of accentuating these natural mosaics. It just still wouldn't be out in the real world. So, using the photomontage technique that I had picked up in design school, I started taking old travel photos and cropping and combining them in Photoshop to make super exaggerated versions of these natural islands and contrasts. These tended to be places that are totally imaginary, a lot of the time made up of landscapes that are continents apart from each other, because I didn't have much material yet from where I had been able to travel up to that point. That limited photography also meant that these were pretty simple compositions, and it wasn't always obvious that the edges circled around to form islands. I wasn't adding aerial views at that point to fill in the gaps. All of this in contrast to most of the watercolor maps that these would evolve into. So, again, partly for those reasons, I didn't think of these compositions as maps at the time. Also, besides being shot at ground level, all the views are facing right side up. So the individual scenes still end up being the focus at least as much as the spatial relationships between them. But still, those relationships were my whole point in making these, and the quality of the photos didn't actually matter to me at all. Most of the individual images just came from grainy scans of 3 by 5 prints, for example. I didn't originally mean for these montages or the general faceting concept to be more than just an experiment. But then I was laid off from my job in 2008, like everyone else, and suddenly I had some time and pressure to think bigger and wonder whether I should do something more with these in case I needed a new career plan. I got a recommendation to print them large format on canvas, thinking of the low image quality as a feature and not a bug. That would make them more immersive, and again, less about standard quality photography. I decided to take the advice about the scale, but in a different direction. Maybe the resolution issue still scared me a bit. I started reinterpreting them in oil paint. Generally, I kept the compositional structures the same, though I did make some of them more dynamic. But I didn't worry about staying faithful to the photography in terms of color and overall mood. On the whole, the paintings turned out more vibrant and surreal. But sometimes I did wonder what the point of doing that was, if these were meant to be about the edges and contrasts, not the quality of the individual landscapes. In any case, though, I started to do a lot less of the oil painting after a year because I found a new job. But I knew that if I was going to keep this islands idea going, it was probably going to need to change direction again. More on that coming soon.